All right, so here we are. This is CNET 160, the CISM class, and today we're going to have a normal lecture doing more of the risk management life cycle. Next week I was going to start the student presentations, but there's going to be a guest lecture. This company, Bay ICT, is a group in San Francisco, and they have these lectures periodically, and this one looks pretty good, talking about how to do AI and how to use it in education at community colleges designed for students. So we'll see. These have been very good in the past. So we'll have that instead of my lecture. And they put the student presentations the week after. So if anybody wants to do a presentation today, you get extra credit. Let me know if anybody's ready. But I'll do the lecture first, and then we'll do presentations if people want to do them today. So that's the only scheduling note I wanted to mention. So let's pick up here. All right, so we did part one, now we're up to part two. I broke this chapter into 4 parts. So we're just going to talk about the risk management life cycle today. And so this is the iterative process to just identify risks, analyze them, and treat them, and then measure the effect of your treating and go back and go around and around, constantly improving. What's that? Is that what MGM didn't do? Well, that's a very good point. What MGM got hacked, of course, and a whole bunch of casinos are down. Yesterday, the hackers came out on social network, and they claimed that they got in with a 10-minute phone call to the help desk. And they didn't explain it further yet, but somehow they called the help desk and convinced them to give them a password or something so they could put on the ransomware. That's what they said it was. There was an interview of a ransomware expert on Paul's Security Weekly. I just recorded it, and he said he does nothing but this. He's a consulting company, goes around helping people clean up their ransomware everywhere. He knows all the groups and all the attacks, and he said, we're never going to stop this. There's nothing you can buy, nothing you can do to stop it. And the second thing he said is that every single time, it's a security 101 problem. They just haven't done the simple stuff. It's an unpatched server, a default password, an old version of an application, a short, simple password, two-factor authentication with SMS that he says is garbage. It's so easy to cheat on the SMS. Just that attack where they pop up a whole bunch of SMS messages on your phone until you click OK. It's one of these simple techniques that gets in. And I think this is why I got into this management classes and stuff. If you have a company and you have 100 or 1,000 workers, how do you actually make sure that none of them are doing a stupid thing? And this is the problem that nobody has solved yet. I mean, I thought the point of security audits and compliance frameworks were that you would test to make sure none of these bad things are happening. But what he says is, in practice, nobody has fixed those simple things. And that's, yeah. He would test them?
Yeah, he would leave UB keys all over the building.
Leave what?
UB keys. He would leave
UB keys
all over the building.
Yeah.
And he would test you to see if you would put it in your computer.
Oh, USB sticks.
Or if you would
oh, good.
bring it back to HR or at the front desk or something or at the student
Yeah.
desk.
And so then he would
test you.
So something would happen if you plugged that in.
That's right, you're stupid enough.
Yeah, that's true. And I also know places where you're supposed to lock your machine every time you walk away. And if you don't, they will punish you or even fire you. And so, it's an interesting, and this, there's different techniques, but the fact is, apparently, nobody has found a technique that really works. Which I can believe because, even if everybody is good and your IT department is good, people come in, they're late, they're in a rush, you have a rush project, they skip the security problems to get done faster, and then they're under pressure. It's kind of obvious how it would happen. Although there are simple big measures, and there's a company I knew, one of my students worked at it, where they were doing high value financial transactions, and the entire company was not connected to the internet at all. It was a local area network that they worked on. They would type in data that came in on paper. They would put the output on paper to avoid getting hacked. And it worked. There's no internet connection at all, except in the break room. There's a Mac that people can use during their break for personal things. But that's it. And that's... Yeah, I don't know. But I mean, this is... that's an effective procedure. That will stop almost every attack. It's possible to hack companies that have no connection to the internet. We did it to the Iranian isotope separators for the nuclear program. We had USB sticks that infected them and damaged them even without an internet connection, but that's difficult and rare. That would greatly lower your risk. Anyway, so, all right, so you'll have, you define this in policies, and so you define the scope, which is the area of the company, area of business that is going to be in your risk management program. The roles and responsibility of people, the workflows, business rules, and business records are part of this. So there are some frameworks and standards available to specify how you do risk assessments and how you do risk management. And here's the general structure of all this. First you determine the scope, which is what part of the business is going to be covered by this program. Then you identify the risks. Then you analyze the risks. You consider how valuable your assets are and what your risk appetite is. How much are you willing to accept a risk to these assets? Then you have risk treatment. You execute things to lower the risks that you have decided are worth lowering. And then you have risk assessment, where you measure how much remaining risk is there, how much has all this succeeded in lowering risk, and then you have another cycle around and around and around, constantly improving it. This is the graphical explanation of pretty much everything we're going to talk about today. And I see a question over there. Does extra credit apply for people who have submitted the assignment as well? I do not understand the question. You have to tell me what you mean by extra credit without submitting an assignment. I don't quite get it. Anyway, so you define the scope, identify your assets and the amount of risk you're willing to accept, and then you do risk assessment and vulnerability assessment, threat advisories, and risk analysis. These are all ways to decide how much residual risk there is. So to analyze a risk, you consider how likely an event is and the impact if it does happen, and then you decide if you want to mitigate that risk. So, and then you come up with a recommendation for your plan. So risk treatments, there's 4 basic treatments. You can just accept a risk. You do nothing and let it happen, because it would cost more to prevent than it would to happen. Like your employees might use the company car for personal errands. They might make personal copies on the copier. They might steal the pencils. And probably it's just too much bother to do anything about that. Then you can mitigate it. This is where you lower the risk somehow by adding some kind of password or lock or monitoring system. Then you can transfer the risk to somebody else by buying insurance, so that it's somebody else's problem to some extent. Or you can change your business to avoid the risky activities, so you no longer do that at all. Like if your company cars are getting wrecked and it's too risky, you just don't have any more company cars there. Everybody has to buy the bus or use their own car, that kind of thing. And then you have communication about your risk decisions. Here's risk avoidance, for example. In California, PG&E was held responsible for a huge fire that killed a bunch of people in Paradise. And they ruled in court that PG&E would be held responsible even if they could not prove that the PG&E lines had started the fire. And so PG&E since then has been shutting down the power whenever the wind gets high. So there is no power delivery to avoid the risk. Now this is really drastic, right? You no longer provide your service to the customers. That's like going out of business, but this is risk avoidance. You just stop doing part of your business because you decide the risk is too high. That's risk avoidance. That's why people who are risk avoidant are considered really terrible security managers. A lot of people just move into a company, they're new, and they say, oh, don't do anything risky, don't do this, don't do that. So then you can't get your work done. If you're not willing to take any risk, you can't run the business. So risk avoidance is a really extreme response to risk. It's not something you do all the time. It's something you do only in special cases where you're actually willing to just abandon this part of your business because it's too risky. It's happening all over California now. I had to get renter's insurance to move into my new place. I've never had it before. And I tried to get it, and I found out, to my surprise, a whole bunch of insurance companies no longer insure houses in California. They all vanished. And so you have to go to funny places to get your insurance now. A bunch of them are pulling out because there's so many wildfires and other disasters. The risk is too high. And I thought they would just raise the rates, but I guess they have trouble deciding how high to raise the rates or something. They've just decided not to serve California for a while, that's risk avoidance. But this is not a normal business behavior. I mean, abandoning your market is pretty extreme. But I must agree, we've had this year, I think we've had 8 so-called 100 or 1,000 year environmental events in Texas and Florida and everywhere. So, the probability tables they use to say, well, how often is a flood or a hurricane going to hit anyway? Those are not true anymore. So they're not kidding. Because of the climate change, the environmental risk is suddenly much greater than it used to be, and they really need to get new data. They need to know how fast this is going to go. Is it going to keep happening? Is it going to keep increasing? if I was insuring homes against fires and floods, I would have the same concern. They're becoming more probable, so how bad is that going to be? How much payout are we going to have to do?
You rent a house, you don't get insurance?
Even if you rent an apartment, they make you get homeowner's insurance, which is in case you set fire to the building. It's like when you drive a car, you have to get liability, so if you hit somebody else and hurt them, you're covered.
We had to get it before we moved to our place.
Yeah, and I wanted to get it from my existing,
Homeowners supposed to get insurance, right?
that's right. And if you rent an apartment, then you're considered that an apartment owner and you have to pay insurance for that. I didn't know this. And so, and I couldn't get it from my insurance provider, which is Liberty Mutual. They wouldn't even answer the phone, which I thought was insane. And so I found there's a new one online called, I think, Lemonade or something. Let you do it online with no nonsense. So I went there. But I couldn't get it. I spent like 2 days trying to get it, and they wouldn't even answer the phone, which is pretty extreme.
How expensive is it?
Like,
$40 to $100.
yeah, $40 to $100 a year. That's about right. Yeah, for an apartment. Yeah. Anyway, so then you have a risk register, which is just a record of what you've done, a list of your risks, you describe the risk, and then what you did about it, and you keep a record of this, then you can review it and keep it up to date. So let's try some Cahoots. I've got them here. Oh, I thought I had them here. Somehow they're gone, such is life. All right. All right, this is 163B1. Here we are. All right. All right. Okay, what's the first step in risk management life cycle? You have to determine the scope. You decide what part of the business is going to be included in your risk management plan. All right, what treatment is best if the risk has a high probability and a low impact? You accept those. Things that are likely to happen but don't do much harm are just too much bother to stop. You just let them happen. All right. All right, Dick's was a sporting goods store, and they decided to destroy their rifles and stop selling rifles. What risk treatment was that? They did that a few years ago. After one of the mass shootings, they said, we're just not going to sell guns anymore. It's going to be too much reputational damage to the company. We just don't even want to do that kind of business anymore. That's avoidance. That's what you do. You change your business to just stop doing something. You just don't do that business anymore because you decide you don't want the risk. All right. All right, which one is a list of risks and treatments? Yep, that's the risk ledger. All right. Alex Cooper. I was thinking of Alice Cooper, but that's a different one. Okay. Well, and Chris C, these look like real names, which is good. Makes it easier for my grader to give you your points. All right. Good. So let's go back to here. All right. So there are standards, methodologies published to guide you through this. The National Institute of Standards, the U.S. government, has got one for managing information security risk, showing you how to do risk management, and then another one just for risk assessments, which are part of risk management, that we talked about. The international one is an ISO, part of the 27000 series, which is the big, expensive one to secure an entire enterprise up to ISO 27000 standards. There's another one called FAIR. So the NIST one is the risk management one, and so it's got multi-level risk management. You can do it at the information systems level, at the business process level, and at the overall organization level. And you got a plan here where you have the information systems at the bottom, where it's the most detailed, and you have specific instructions: install this product, use this password or something. Then you have business processes, and up here you have the organization. And so risks are communicated upward. You analyze it to determine risks, and then you send it up to the organization to decide what to do about those risks, and then down come policies and recommendations from above. Risk awareness and risk decisions come down. So this is what you think. You're working down here with your hands-on things, doing the manual work, and then you report information about to your management about what the risks are, and then management issues orders about what you're going to do about it. That's the same for any kind of business decision, including risk management. So at the organization view, you've got governance, your executives, and the development of strategies. At the mission and business process, you have your enterprise architecture, your security architecture, and your business processes. Making them risk aware is the idea, so that if you have a process like you have customers, remember, there was a time, I don't think this is true anymore, but 10 years ago, every time you would buy anything, like a pair of shoes or anything, it would have a card in there, and they would say, fill out a bunch of information on this card and send it back to the company so we know who our customers are. And they just had a general idea that maybe they would send you a catalog or something, and in most cases, they never did anything with that data. And it turned out that when they lost that data, they were privacy breaches and everything. So companies kind of wised up and said, there's no point collecting a bunch of data we don't need. Like I say, Google is doing the same thing with their new sandbox thing. They've realized they're collecting too much data about everybody, and it would be wiser to collect less data. And that's what they mean by being risk aware in your business processes. Consider, when you decide to do a business thing, what are the risks of what you're doing? And then at the information systems, you've got tactical things like specific details of your system's vulnerabilities and the steps in your development life cycle, machines you deploy, what type they are, and that sort of thing. So those are the three tiers. All right, and so you've got risk framing, then assessment, response, and monitoring, which is the same 4 steps with different names that we talked about before. You determine how much the risks matter. You respond by mitigating the risks or transferring them or perhaps accepting them, and then you monitor to see how effective this has been and decide if you have to take more steps to improve it. The guide for conducting the risk assessments is here, the National Institute of Standards guide. This is the standard methodology, and it gives you a whole bunch of worksheets to follow to guide you. So you have threats and vulnerabilities, their probability of occurrence and impact are the things you consider. So you determine the purpose, scope, and the source of threats, vulnerabilities, and impact information, and they have a lot of example lists to get you started. So they've just got tons of them. There's threat source inputs, adversary capabilities and intent, non-adversary threats like, bad weather and stuff, where it's not a human attacking you, but there's still a thing that will happen that will hurt you, and various threat events. Adversarial threat events are people attacking you. Non-adversarial threat events are things like an illness going through your staff that didn't come from a human, and so on. So you consider all these various threat sources and events that might happen. Then you consider vulnerabilities and predisposing conditions which make you more likely to take damage from those. So they have a vulnerability severity assessment scale and predisposing conditions. Now, I had trouble understanding what predisposing conditions are, so I looked one of them up for an example. Here's some examples of predisposing conditions: compliance with technical standards at an architectural level, use of specific products, allocation of specific security functionality. It's the details of how you set up, say, your network, which might be a condition that makes you more vulnerable. And we were just talking about this on Paul's Security Podcast with this ransomware expert. He said people's Active Directory, he always finds it's full of unnecessary permissions. They have accounts for one machine to talk to another machine to get, and they just give them all like domain administrator rights or something stupid like that because there's too much bother to fine-grain the permissions. And that's, a predisposing condition that will make a hack worse. Anyway, so that's one. Here's other things, are your machines networked and multi-user or single user or standalone? And this is what I was suggesting before. If you have machines that are not even connected to the internet, then that greatly lowers your risk. And that's a predisposing condition. All right. So then you got the likelihood of occurrence, determine how likely this is, how likely that the threat will be initiated, how likely that it will actually do some harm, and so on. You figure out these are the considerations, and then you determine the magnitude of the impact. Examples, there's a scale, there's minor impacts that don't matter, and then there's impacts that are disastrous and totally end your business. So you're doing all these things, you get your risk, you get an assessment scale, and you have templates for these various types of risk available. And then after you've done that, then you communicate the results and you maintain your assessment by updating it. So you have a closed loop. All right, and all these standards do the same thing in slightly different ways. Here's the international standard, ISO 27000. A structured approach to risk assessment and risk management. So just like before, you establish the scope, then the criteria you're going to use to evaluate risk and impact. Then you determine when you would accept a risk and what is an acceptable amount of risk, and then you make a plan to lower all the risks down to your acceptable level. So you do risk assessment, you determine the importance of your assets, the threats, what controls are available to limit the harm, vulnerabilities, and consequences. Then you evaluate the risks, then you treat risks. The same as before, you use mitigation to reduce the risk, you accept the risk, they call it risk retention, you avoid the risk, or you transfer the risk to someone else. These are things to do, and after you've done your risk treatment, there is some remaining risk, and that's your residual risk. There's no way to take it to zero. So you have risk communications. You have to inform people of assessments, you have to collect information, you have to discuss your risk tolerance and your risk treatment decisions. You have to have educational information about security to your company, and you have to have communications about security incidents. You have to report when you get hacked, tell government agencies, your customers, your employees, the consequences of security incidents. Then you've got to monitor and review. This is why nothing can be static. Everything is always changing in the modern world. So there's new assets and retired assets as you purchase new equipment and buildings and hire new staff. You've got changes in business process and technology. New threats appear, new vulnerabilities appear. The probability of threats changes. Like I say, it's happened to all the insurance companies. Suddenly, hurricanes and floods and fires are much more likely. So their previous risk analysis is no longer valid, and they can't really continue to do business the way they used to. And you have your security incidents may alter your understanding. This is very common. Like I've said, one of the things beginning security researchers do, like I did it for years, is notify companies, you've got a security problem, nobody cares. And all the old experts say, don't even bother talking to anybody, just let them get hacked. After they get hacked, they'll develop an interest in security. Before that, they'll just blow you off. That's the thing. The incidents may change your organization's attitude towards these things. That's how it works. All right. And of course, the laws and regulations and the market may change. If you listen to Scott Galloway's podcast, he's very interesting. He's an NYU economics professor, and he does Pivot podcast and another one called, I think, Prof. G's Markets. It's very interesting. And he talks about this. He's made most of his money by buying businesses that are dying. Like right now, taxi cabs are dying, and network cable TV is dying. And he said, what people think, if an industry is going away, like renting VCR tapes, there's no money to be made. He said, no, there's plenty of money. The industry is dying, but you just have to cut costs faster than the dying, and there's money to be made. He made his most money in distress, like he invested in Yellow Pages. The paper big books, like 15 years ago. They were on the way out, replaced by the internet, but there was a period of 5 or 10 years where they were still making those things, and there was money to be made if you do it right. That's the kind of thing. Even markets are changing, so, that changes how important things are, how much you want to protect them, how much money you have available. Anyway, all right, so then there's another system, FAIR. This is another way to do the same thing, to evaluate factors that contribute to risk and estimate the loss. And so it determines 6 types of loss. Productivity loss is that your workers are no longer able to accomplish as much for some reason. And there's the cost, I think, of the response itself to the action, replacing things, fines and judgment, losing competitive advantage, and losing reputation. These are types of loss that can happen to your company. And there's ways a threat agent may act. They might access things they shouldn't access. They might misuse them, disclose information that shouldn't be public, modify information that they shouldn't be able to modify, or deny use of it, a proper use. So this is just another way to organize your thinking. That's what all of these are. All right, so let's take a look at another Kahoot. CB2. I was teaching a class over the summer to a room full of security teachers, and one student here came in and said, in Star Trek, they don't smoke or drink or anything. That's all gone. And I said, yeah, I think that's where we're headed. I think smoking and drinking are going to vanish as people decide this is just bad for you. And one of the guys, going to a distillery, that was his business. He said, don't say that. I said, well, you're in a business that's on the way down, I think. Realistically, your business is not going to grow. It's going to go down. And that doesn't mean you can't do it. It doesn't mean you can't make a living at it. It just, you should be aware. You're not in a growth industry. I think you're in a declining industry. But this is something people don't like to admit, the defects of what they do. Like one thing amazing, I used to ride a bicycle everywhere before my knees gave out, and I had students that were motorcyclists, and I had like 3 or 4 students come to me and say, oh, bicycles are too dangerous. You should ride a motorcycle. They're safer. And I'd look at them like, this is just amazing. People deny the risk of what they do. Like my dad would smoke, and he had this argument, oh, cigarettes are bad for you, but pipes are fine. Everybody tries to deny the truth about what they do. But if you're going to be a security professional, you have to admit there are risks in everything you do, and then you have to make risk decisions. So you don't say there's no risk, you don't deny the risk, you evaluate the risk. And you have to be more mature than trying to lie to yourself about your risks. Anyway. All right, so what's the U.S. government standard for risk assessments? It's 30. I was going to get it wrong. I have a hard time keeping it straight. I thought the lower number would be the risk management and the higher number would be the assessment, but I guess it's the other way. Let me go back to it. It's hard for me to tell them apart. All right, so 30 is risk assessments, and 39 is risk management. Okay, fair enough. It's not as logical as I like it to be. I'd like the big container to be the small number and the detail to be the higher number, but that's not the way it is. Anyway, all right. Which one has 6 types of loss? That's fair. All right, it kind of reminds me of Microsoft's Stride framework. Microsoft has 5 kinds of attacks. Stride, spoofing, I forget, anyway, it's, one of my corporate clients uses it, the Stride model, to analyze attackers. Various people have these systems to just consider all the types. In fact, since I brought it up, let me bring it up, because it certainly belongs here. I'm probably in this chapter somewhere. Yep, Stride threat modeling, there it is. This is a big one, actually used by one of my major corporate customers. And it came from Microsoft, and, oh, give me a break. I just want the list. I know spoofing, and there we are. Spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. This is Microsoft's list of types of attacks. And, just, there's nothing magic about any of these. They're just ways to list things to think about to make sure you didn't overlook something. And that's a big one that people use, in the same spirit as this 6 types of damage people can do. Anyway, that's FAIR is another system. All right, so what's the U.S. standard for risk management? Now I know. Yes, 39, NIST 839. All right. And which standard has organization, mission, and information systems review? That's the international one, ISO, 27000 series. All right, good. Rolling, in tight. And Steph has won twice. There. Got the winners. Let me stop the recording.